Suzanne. We're here in Brierfield Library in the headquarters of In-Situ, the artist collective that's been operating from here for about 3 years. They're incredibly embedded in this neighbourhood, as you know, and you are their latest artist in residence. Well, let's talk about where we started from, really, which was your interest and fascination, really, with Shape Note.
I've been trying since I worked in Kentucky in 2000 to 2005 in Appalachia and discovered Shape Note music, which is one of the earliest forms of American music, and it's performed a cappella, and it's a form of music where people sit in facing each other in a square, and they
quite small groups,
small or large. It could be 500 people, and they basically use a text that has a couple of hundred songs in it that have been handed down, and it's quite a democratic form. You go around the group and different people choose which song, then they stand up in the middle of the group and they lead it. So that's one aspect that I find very interesting, that it's part of the Chautauqua tradition, which in the United States was people going from town to town and creating cultural events and educational events simultaneously. So it's kind of like pre-television. It's the way in which people came together to have substantial conversations while they were often entertained, while they sang, and so on.
And shared food.
Yeah. So those forms of kind of community-based engagement are ones that we're trying to reclaim in our culture today. And I think that also the a cappella, the driving rhythm, the embodiment of Shape Note, was very exciting for me. So I've been trying to do a project with Shape Note music for a very long time. And this is the first time that you've offered a kind of a context and a presentation and a reason to be engaging with this form. So we have Shape Note and we have Asian-based musical traditions, and we're saying, can these two plus food underneath bring people together? So the question for me is how. And the other question, of course, is does this Shape Note music, which has really been prominent in the southern parts of the United States and in the hills in Appalachia, does this really translate back here? And fortunately it does, because as we found out, some very early origination, both music and thinking, has come from this area.
Because, well, it originated in the UK, and it's particularly strong in the north of England and Scotland, actually. But Lancashire particularly had its own form, Lancashire Salvage, that seems to have originated around the 17th century, and that really emanated from a history of non-conformity in Lancashire that I've heard sort of Shape Note experts here tell me that, it was really strong in Lancashire because people here don't like being told what to do, let alone what to sing. So they'll make up their own songs and they'll sing together, and they won't be told to go to a certain church and do it. It seemed to have originated in small, isolated, generally poorer communities where people wanted to come together and find their own collective and spiritual expression that made sense in their everyday context. So a lot of the songs that they sang were about, it's bloody cold outside. We're grafting, from morning till night. What is it, that provides the joy in our lives? And actually, the joy in our lives is coming together, singing with our friends and family, and then eating. And it's that simple, and it's those sort of very simple, intimate connections with spiritual and creative expression that we often forget in art now.
I think it's complicated by what we're not talking about, and that is that most Shape Note music that I've seen is Christian. And it's really devotional Christian worship music. Just like I suspect we're going to find that a lot of the forms that we're exploring originate in religious and devotional traditions. And that makes this a complicated territory to walk through.
Yeah.
I'm excited to work with Dr. Ron Penn from the University of Kentucky at Lexington, because he's quite a global authority on Shape Note and a great practitioner, and we're lucky he'll be coming here and being part of this project.
Really exciting. We had our first real public event last night where we tried to make that happen, to bring a whole series of different traditions together, from the meditational chants used by the predominantly Sufi community here, to the sort of stock church singing that really originated in this area from Shape Note, which is very kind of simple, repetitive, rhythmic singing. It was a good night, wasn't it?
Last night was amazing. It was amazing. And beyond my wildest dreams, it was an amazing experience. Yeah. There was almost 80 people in that room, number one. Number two, it was truly different generations, from 2 years old to 80 years old or beyond. And it really represented a cross-section of people from the Pendle area. So I thought it was wonderful, and it went off almost seamlessly.
The whole project is based on this notion of vocal expression that may not be called singing, and that's quite tricky to describe, isn't it?
Right.
And it was and what was so lovely is that actually just when people demonstrate what they do within those traditions, it becomes very obvious, and you don't need to labour the point.
And they were surprisingly willing to demonstrate. I find that I'm just now understanding a tiny bit of the differences between, for example, Sufi chanting, nasheed, naat, the various different forms of vocal expression. And I'm sure there are many, many rules or traditions that we could easily be tromping on. For example, the word singing. Singing means something, or music. Music means something very different than vocalizing.
Exactly.
And we might call an a cappella expression music. And from what I'm understanding, people in the Pakistani community have very different and complex relationships to devotional traditions. And even here, people come from many, many different places at many times, and they bring with them various subtle and different languages, cultures, and so on. So I thought, given that the people that were in that room were the people who were, the people from Southeast Asia in terms of their heritage. They're obviously British citizens, but those people, they expressed a great deal of generosity. In their willingness to tolerate the level of ignorance that a lot of people here have about their cultures and traditions.
Because it's so multi-layered. The British Asian kind of microcosm in Pendle is really complex in itself, so that it's multi-ethnic, it's multi-faith, it's multi-generational. I heard a few, particularly of the young people, admiring your accent, and so to have a foreign accent coming in, particularly a non-European, is actually, I think, a really useful opener.
Well, I think it is, and I think artists frequently use the otherness of being an artist and the outsiderness of being from someplace else as a way to interrogate meanings that may be embedded and unexpressed in cultures. But when we enter an environment, there's a great deal of an interest and curiosity that we bring with us to engage people in the expression of who they are. One thing that's particularly complicated for me here is being, and in many environments, is being from the United States. We have such a history of parochialism, frankly. We don't have the exchange between cultures that exists, for example, in Europe. And as a result, right now, at this very moment, I'm standing here as a citizen of the United States, which has a major presidential candidate who said all Muslims should be excluded categorically from the United States. And here I am operating within an environment that's 30 to 40% Muslim. And so when I stand in front of or I speak to people, I have to be very sensitive to the many meanings that I'm bringing. One of them is I live in LA and therefore I probably know Kim Kardashian. And the other is that I live in the United States and I could harbor those anti-Muslim sentiments that exist and are represented through media in our country.
Yeah. And by the same rule, that you bring that sensibility here. And this is your third visit to Brierfield, and you've quietly, as you do, been learning, exploring this quite small town, neighbourhood, community. And again, I think the question that you were asking is that question about integration. And do these cultural complexities connect? Do they feed and bounce off each other, or not? And I think you instantly identified that they do not. There is a real parallel lives syndrome happening here, which I think many people here, and I think last night testified to, think is a great loss to the kind of cultural richness of this area. And I think that's what was so kind of joyous about last night's event, where it was simply just an invitation across the Pendle community for people to come and share their vocal traditions. And everybody, I think, was really surprised by how uplifting that event was. And partially because singing or vocalising your kind of cultural, spiritual expressions is an uplifting experience, but actually sharing those different traditions is totally rare here. And that was what was so enjoyable. And I think that's one of your amazing talents, actually, to kind of find, like acupuncture, the point at which energies can be channeled through a project.
Well, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out that food and music are two of the most accessible kind of traditions through which different cultures and intersect. And I think that the field of art is for centuries really, but definitely within my lifetime, has been replete with examples of artists who use food as ways to bring out different aspects of community. It brings me to thinking about not only why, but what we're trying to do with this project, which is to do what we did last night in a more thorough and complex and expansive way, and bring many, many more people into this conversation that results in a cultural production. The old mill is an incredible site to begin with, because what I was thinking last night is that we came together in this space of Brierfield that is, in a sense, a translocation of the space that existed in the mill.
Exactly.
In the 60s. And that space was a space where conviviality and cross-cultural friendships and traditional sharings could take place. And did take place. And today you don't have the mill.
Your projects don't go for the easy path. Your projects are about actually pinpointing where the issue is, what's the kind of grit, if you like, in the mill.
I think of it as sort of the complexity of the social and contextual interaction, and that many people who work in community-based art, it's not that they're going for the simple, it's that they they are only addressing the simple. And I think it's more challenging to uncover the elephant in the room and talk about it. And for example, the issue of racism and the parallel lives you were talking about. There's a couple of ways to look at that, and people that I've spoken to look at that in very different ways, and they have positions on it that we have to respect. One is we're all British citizens, and to separate people from in terms of their ethnic heritage is a way of instigating a divide in thinking from the beginning. There's an opposite way of thinking about that that's particularly prominent around certain moments of revolution in my experience in the black culture in the United States, which is happening right now. I mean, there's another civil rights movement taking place. And just like the black nationalist movement, there are points in time where making the distinction is key to uncovering the elephant in the room. And there are other positions, and I find both of them right here in this community, where you want to stress commonality and not make the distinction. And I think that's, to me, the thing that we're exploring. The other thing in this project is this trajectory from a moment in industrial England when work brought people here. People were needed, brought people together. People were able to have a meaningful life where they felt respected. And to a moment now when unemployment is actually used as a way to divide people. My work is highly labor intensive. You could compare it with factory work in a sense. And it's very collective, and it's involving lots and lots of people who need to come, in order for the work to be successful, who need to bring their own creative imaginaries into the work. And then my job as an artist is to sort of bring those imaginaries together into one fairly shared vision of what's going to happen. If you have 1,000 people participating in a performance, or 500 or 300 even, you really need, you cannot rely in this kind of work on rehearsals. First off, they're not professionals, they're not paid, and you're not going to get a lot of their time. So they don't come back and back and back and perfect a performance. My idea of, quote, rehearsal is really the idea of creating an image within people's imaginary. And the work that I do in community is to identify people whose imaginations and thinking processes that I can align with, because there are many people that I can't. And I think that in projects like this one, yesterday, for the third time, I saw some teenagers at Marsden Heights, and I started asking them questions and listening to their response and listening to the range of their creativity, and I thought, there's some young people here I can actually seriously work with to give me creative advice. And so it's not some kind of paternalistic, hi, we need some young kids on the project, and it really is looking at individuals within the community, wherever they're from, that can seriously enter a conversation on that will eventually be able to align itself. Not that it's the best, not that it's the only. There might be another conversation, another art form, another project over here, which is amazing and different, that I could never do. But I've become clear over years that I can do what I can do with the people that I can collaborate with, and when we enter those forms of collaboration, they're quite, they're quite robust. I mean, I think it's very important to determine where your authority is and is not. And so as an outsider, there's certain things I have no authority over. When somebody schools me from the Asian community here, that this is the way to talk about it and this is not the way to talk about it. Maybe somebody else schools me differently, but I have to respect and navigate those territories in a way that eventually confers authorship to organizers that are not me.
Yes. And
the same with me. It's more like, the way I work is more like theater, where there's a kind of a collective process of musicians tell you what musicians do, and music installers tell you what they do, and video people tell you what they do and so on. And you work with them, and there are certain lines that have to be negotiated.
Yeah.
And I think negotiation is one of the key strategies. And then for this kind of work, and then understanding where your core is and being as transparent about that core as possible.